American heroes defeated the Nazis, dethroned the fascists, toppled the communists, saved American values, upheld American principles, and chased down the terrorists to the very ends of the earth. We are now in the process of defeating the radical left, the Marxists, the anarchists, the agitators, the looters, and people who, in many instances, have absolutely no clue what they are doing.
President of the United States at the White House on Saturday. Welcome back to Morning Joe. Jonathan Lemire, Elise Jordan, Mike Barnicle, all still with us. And joining the conversation, author and commentator Anand Giridharadas. He is the host of Vice TV's show, Seat at the Table. Anand, it's great to see you. It's been a while since we've spoken. I'm just interested first, we've got a lot to get to with you, but in your reaction to what you heard in that speech on Saturday at the White House, but also on Friday night at Mount Rushmore, when the president talked about the bad, evil people, as he called them, trying to strip away American history, people trying to undo the American story. How did those two speeches put together hit your ear?
I mean, the president of the United States is making it very clear that he is sort of a fascist who didn't do the homework, and it's sort of maybe the only saving grace that he didn't do the reading, which might give us a little bit of room yet to save democracy. But this is increasingly clear as a strategy where, as Jonathan was saying, as a matter of political analysis, but it's also a moral fact that he's basically trying to govern with 30-some% of the population, but offering them his overwhelmingly white base, the hooch of supremacy, in the hope that they get drunk and don't realize that this country's economy is not benefiting them. Its institutions don't work for them anymore. And by the way, don't work for any of the other people who are not voting for Donald Trump either, with the exception of his oligarch friends. He is clearly doubling down in a moment of a murderous pandemic fueled by his own neglect, doubling down on white supremacy and frankly, fascist calls for military dealing with protesters and all of that in a way that feels unimaginable.
And, you know, Anand, as I listen to you speak and read a lot of what you write, you don't spare Democrats in the middle of this conversation either. Obviously, Donald Trump, as you say, bears a lot of the blame here. But Democrats now in this moment, in this movement in the streets for racial justice, they've pledged their support for the movement. I'm talking about leading politicians in Washington. They've backed the movement. But that's the easy part, as you say. What more should Democrats be doing to make this moment real and to make it mean something?
Well, you know, as you teased before the break, you know, I really do think these are 5 crises that have entered an acute phase right now that you're talking about on the broadcast every day. We got the health crisis, obviously, the economic crisis that has caused, the racial crisis forced by this great uprising, a democratic crisis incarnated by the president testing the rule of law, and a climatic crisis. Remember the climate? And the silver lining of these synced crises happening at the moment that they are together, intersecting, making themselves each worse through the prism of the other, is that we are actually liberated from the illusion that we were living right before, that our systems were right, that our way of life was right. It is impossible to believe that today. Whatever you thought about our democratic institutions or the form of manic hypercapitalism we were practicing or employer-based health care or whatever, you have to think new things now. And so when it comes to the Democrats, the question is, are we seeing, it's very clear what the president is doing. Are we seeing an equal and opposite and virtuous message that is a vision, actually, not a message, that is exciting, thrilling, and adequate to this moment? We have now in regular white people across this country putting White Fragility and Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist on the bestseller list. Regular middle-class people are buying that book, trying to figure out how to change themselves. Do we see in members of Congress, in Joe Biden, frankly, in Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, do we see leadership of the party that is an FDR scale vision for how to transform these countries in a moment of crisis that actually reminds a lot of people old enough to know of those kinds of very dark moments in history right before it gets light, this kind of despairing moment that sometimes, if we play our cards right, erupts into hope.
Anand, Mike Barnicle's here with a question for you. Mike.
Anand, I have always valued your opinion, and this has been a horrific weekend in terms of rhetoric from the Oval Office, from the President of the United States in Mount Rushmore, and on Saturday in Washington, D.C. So let me ask you this very simple question, and it's about the racial aspect of your five crises, the racial crisis in this country. It has been with us for 400 years. Do you think we will ever reach a time, when our elected officials, both Democrat and Republican, instead of viewing race as a special problem, a significant special interest that we have to deal with as a special interest, do you think we'll ever get to the point where they, as human beings, recognize, realize, and talk about more often the fact that the aspirations of a black family for their children are the same exact aspirations that we have, white people, whatever, for our families?
You know, I think I hear your question, and I would love to hope that that is the case. I think we sometimes don't give ourselves credit as a culture for having the capacity to change. I actually do think, if you look at all the polling on this, white people are actually, according to the data, being affected by these protests. This Black Lives Matter uprising has caused a real mind shift in large numbers of white people in a way that maybe in 2014 you didn't see in the polls. So people can change. Our attitudes to LGBTQ people have drastically changed in everybody's lifetime on this show. However, it's important to say on the question of race, unlike maybe any other question we could bring up about our economy or LGBTQ people or anything else, that this is the original sin of this country. And so much of the edifice of this country, philosophical edifice, institutional edifices, the text of our Constitution is built with this racism baked in. In some ways, the racism has allowed the structure to be what it is, right? You wouldn't have had the Constitution enacted without the 3/5 clause in there. And so the challenge is, this is the ultimate moral Jenga game, right? We have to remove these pieces of our national character, of our education system, of our Constitution. We have to remove all these things. And a lot of people fear, I think those who resent these changes, resent this conversation, that we're going to lose the whole structure if we do that. And I think what those of us who want this change to happen have to argue is, no, actually the opposite. We will never be whole as a people. We will never be healthy. We will never be safe. We will never actually have the pursuit of happiness as we could if we don't deal with the stain of race. The very white people voting for Donald Trump are foreshortening their lives because of COVID and because of a lack of universal health care in this country, because they are sold instead the hooch of supremacy, right? In this and so many other ways, everybody in this country, everybody watching this is disfigured by the racism that has been the original fact of this country, some far more than others. But I hope we are getting to a place where people are waking up. And it seems to me this is a wake up.
Anand, I liked what you said about how this possibly could be a moment of hope after a really dark time. And since the pandemic began and the ensuing months of death and then of protest, what do you see as the most hopeful trends for this country?
I think I'm very struck, maybe what feels new this time is all the reading that regular people are doing, and we see that reflected in bestseller lists. We see it in school curriculums. I mean, every school that I have had a glimpse into, colleges, grade schools, is right now thinking about how do you adjust curriculum, how do you teach this moment. Parents of young children like me, I think we just signed up for some workshop about how to talk to our kids about race. We probably haven't done as good a job about that because they're 2 and 5. but people are now realizing you got to do that. I think what feels hopeful is something between the first cries of Black Lives Matter several years ago and today, and this is how protest works. You got to keep saying the same thing, and maybe you hope people will listen. Somewhere down the line, a lot of, frankly, moderate people, the people Dr. King called white moderates, somehow flipped from thinking this is an extreme movement to this is a truthful movement declaring an honest, basic truth. And now you have people like Mitt Romney signing on to that kind of slogan. And so my big hope is not in our leaders, frankly, at this moment, but in regular people educating themselves about what supremacy is and the possibility of liberating ourselves from that original sin.
Anand Giridharadas, his show is Seat at the Table on Vice TV. Anand, great to see you, my friend.
Thank you so much. By the way, the show is no more, but I am still here.
Oh, good. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll add that to your list of credits and look forward to your next one.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.